Good afternoon, and I'm going to call to order June 2nd Housing Committee meeting at 1:04. The approval of the agenda. Do I have a mover? Siobhan. Second. Mason.
We want to make that change to the last item.
Yes, we do. That's why you pointed it out to me. Okay. I'd like to amend the agenda to include strategies as a final item on our list.
You're supposed to say what it is, so it would be 4E.
Strategies. Oh, okay, 4E.
Yeah, just sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. We need to approve that again or not? Yes, we should. Okay, all right. Do I have a mover on accepting that amended agenda for today? Malcolm, seconded. Ryan. Recommendation that the minutes of the Housing Committee meeting held on May the 19th, 2022 be adopted. Do I have a mover for that? Terry, a seconder? Yvonne? All right, and at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to do the presentation portion of this to start off our discussion for today. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Brenda. Okay, so here's our agenda. You can see we've added strategies at the bottom. Where are we now? We're building strategies now, finally, yay. So here's the updated schedule that we talked about last meeting. So we've moved up strategy development into June, wrap up on intro to tools. Now, looking to have a housing strategy draft for July and start public consultation in August. Likely happening in September. And then housing recommendation for council would happen October.
Okay.
So here's where strategy is at.
Yes, Malcolm?
I just realized on schedule, so when is the election, civil
I
election?
get it. Or 13.
So if we have members on the board representing council.
There could be, okay. I mean, our schedule is flexible. We can obviously make a note here, look.
Not a big deal that 3 members represent council, but recommendations from this committee might be going to a different council and might need new reps after election.
Look into it.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Malcolm.
If we can get everything done by late September, then it's a non-issue, I guess.
I think it's going to depend on availability of stakeholders, but we'll find out more. More about. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so here's where our housing strategy is at so far. Here's our working vision statement. I've got our copy up on the wall now behind Councillor Malcolm. Yes, read. Our working goals.
And if we could go back, did you recognize me?
I did recognize you. You want to go back?
Yeah, to the mission statement. So the title of that is a working vision statement. So typically we try to keep that as short as possible, not or any vision statement. So I wonder if we can get rid of the words, the vision of the Sicamous affordable housing strategy is, because that's redundant, because it's in our it's in our housing strategy under working vision. So why couldn't that statement just start with to address?
Yep, that makes sense.
Get rid of some verbiage there and it doesn't lose any intent at all.
Thank you.
All right. Next, so working goals. I'll bring it out because this will be useful when we get to talking about strategies and building them out a bit a little later today. So support a range of housing opportunities and choices that meet the needs of seniors, young adults, and families. Provide healthy, safe, and affordable housing for people of different ages and abilities. Provide a variety of housing types that can accommodate changes in ages and abilities over time. So we've got our potential partners that were identified in a previous session. Those are also, we might want to look at those a little later today when we're working on strategies. Barriers and opportunities, same thing. They're on the wall between Member Tyson and
Yes,
Not gonna do this. the whole-
okay, please. You're not gonna do this. No, you.
Under NIMBYism, there was a few things we mentioned as like typically some NIMBYism stuff is, which a few we didn't capture there, like crime, increased crime, and noise. They're just standard NIMBYism things, so increased crime and noise, if we could add that to under NIMBYism, if the committee agrees.
Sure, add it in.
Thank you.
Okay.
okay, like that note. So these are the strategies that have come up through all our meetings so far. We'll come back to them at the end of the meeting and see if we can start identifying potential partners we could work with on these, who might these strategies might be for in terms of our need groups, and which potentially are there particular locations where this might work in town, right? Which would then later translate into potentially official community plan and zoning stuff. Okay, so wrap up from last meeting of tools. So today, we're going to talk about land trusts, housing cooperatives, and an item I missed on the agenda that was asked about was pocket neighborhoods. Everything we covered last meeting is here, is mostly local government tools. Okay, so land trusts. Land trusts are for provincially or federally registered nonprofit charitable societies. They can be used to provide access to land and housing. Community land trusts is generally what those are called. They acquire and hold land and or buildings for the benefit of the community. They can separate the market value of the land from the value of housing. The housing is owned by an individual or a co-op or a nonprofit or a combination of all three. This tool can be used for rental homes, Aip ownership. I'm trying to remember what the heck that stands for. It has to do with assured the value of the housing remains affordable over time. Doesn't change. Cooperative housing is another housing format that can be used with seniors housing, mobile home parks, and shelters.
I'm gonna. Yes, Siobhan?
Have we defined what affordable is?
Sorry,
I think.
I think we have, like,
with our
is
vision.
there a percentage?
I
Or
think we just,
are we asking what a senior thinks is affordable, or what a low income person thinks is affordable, or what up and coming family thinks is affordable?
Yes,
I think that's a
All very different numbers.
right, and I think that's a great question in our public when we speak to our community.
Yeah, so there'll be very different criteria for different groups depending on what it is.
Yeah,
So
that's something we'll address in the future, though.
that's, yeah, they'd be in different ways. And I think, well, there's an example, the case study we have for today, there's an example of those two different income groups
Yeah.
in a mixed development.
Because I think what I read was 20% below. Is that correct, Mo?
No, it's, well, there's different ways. I think as a committee, we agreed to default to BC Housing's definition of affordable. And so in BC Housing, they have a housing spectrum. And at the front end of the spectrum is get a person off the street and into transitional housing. Our committee is more focused on low income and middle income sort of housing, if you will. And so the definition for affordable is 30% of household income
Okay.
is the big umbrella definition of affordable. But on the left side of the housing spectrum, there's I hate to use the word welfare, but people on social assistance. They could be even lower than 30% of household income for their definition of affordable housing. But the main definition is 30% of household income, no more than 30%. 30% should be spent towards housing
Doesn't exist in BC at all.
of combined. Well, in Sicamous, I think our housing needs assessment said over 50% of our population is paying greater than 30% for
That's
housing.
Okay.
Do you have
So
any,
that's identified in our housing needs assessment of
Yeah.
how it works in Sicamous, yeah. But you're right, that's why we're doing this.
Okay, Tyson?
do we have information on like what median income is in town of what people are earning, what the averages is?
We do, so that's all in our housing needs assessment. There's
Okay.
near the back. I can maybe print you a copy after.
Okay, sweet.
And
And,
show you where,
and do you know what they are? No?
it's been a while since I've looked at it, but it's based on information for our area,
Right,
right? And they,
area being Sycamus specifically?
but we're kind of lumped in with some of electoral area E a little bit.
Okay,
So it's not necessarily specifically Sycamus because that information isn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not separated out that way,
hmm,
right?
right.
Through the census. So, but yeah, I can show you where that info is and get you a printed out version and show you kind of where the key.
That would be an interesting correlation to draw is like, can't see it being 30% is.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
low.
Shoe Shop Community Foundation did a labor needs assessment about 4 years ago, maybe. And in that labor needs assessment, they did dive into housing a bit. But what they found in as far as income for Sicamous is that there's a gap between low income earners and there's a gap in the middle income earners in Sicamous. You're either at the low end of the scale or at the high end of the scale. We don't meet the provincial standards of percentages across the board. In Sicamous, there's a gap for middle income. You're either at the lower end of the spectrum or the higher end, but there's this gap in middle income.
That's helpful.
Yvonne, were you gonna? Did you have something else?
No, that was
Okay, all right, okay.
Okay, so our next tool, cooperative housing. So cooperative housing, cooperative, it's a legal association incorporated as a cooperative. They provide at-cost housing to their members. It's controlled by the members who have a vote in all the decisions. They were originally developed in Canada during the 1970s and 80s through government social housing programs. This idea has been brought back as a strategy to address housing needs. So a lot of the existing cooperative housing in Canada, they're older ones, but there are newer ones starting to be built. So in an equity housing co-op, which allows for someone to own their own home, It's a new evolution of the co-op where individuals can own a unit as opposed to the co-op owning the units. So the video that I shared with everyone, it talks about that model, this AIP ownership model. In that case, the equity gain is regulated by a formula that where the community land trust is holding the land. That trust would establish the formula to keep housing affordable in perpetuity. So a little more information here. So Mark White from UBC is one of the proponents of this model. So it's neither rental or social housing specifically. The housing equity is social, so everyone is kind of, depending on the format, earning equity. They're typically mixed income communities, and the housing units are not segregated based on income. They're kind of assigned based on need. So I do have the video here if anybody wants to watch it. It is about 10 minutes long, so I don't know if you want to, but they do run through an example. This is from the ICF Foundation of this AIP shared equity kind of model where you come in with your down payment, you buy a home, and it does the comparison between it actually increases in value versus if it loses value. So if it increases in value, there's a percentage you have to give back to the co-op or the nonprofit that they can use to continue to provide housing. If it loses value, then you don't have to give that percentage back. So basically that family, they will always come out with more than what they went in with as far as the down payment. So they did some pretty interesting math, and like they came out with a fairly decent down payment for another home somewhere else after 10 years.
Yes, Siobhan.
I love co-op ideas, but I think the other big thing on here is it is not, people aren't buying for investments. So people aren't buying in to invest, they're buying in to be in a community and be in a home.
Correct.
And I think that really needs to be, that we don't have people flipping houses.
Right. Yeah, because with the co-op, there's no limit to how long you can stay. So once you're in, that's your home. You would treat it as if it's your home. And you're not a renter, right? And at such time as you need to move on, you move on, whether the market has raised or lowered. I watched the video, it's very good. And that you're still coming out with whatever you put in. You've invested it, unless it's, yeah, even if the market has dropped somewhat, there is still an opportunity. It's 50% that you share with the affordable housing.
Yeah, so there is an agreement that you sign around that. Yeah, like if you're not living there, then like you can't continue to own in the co-op kind of thing. That's what I understand.
Malcolm?
Yeah, and we were provided some other reading material for co-op, and they mentioned that you can still get government grants for a co-op. And the co-op creates their own board and regulates themselves as not as owners, but as residents, let's call them tenants or residents. So the board establishes criteria of who's eligible to stay in those units. So, and then a waiting list is established based on that criteria. So the board itself, the co-op itself, uses that housing.
Yeah, and I think you end up with a mixed community too, right? Like when we talk about having seniors and young families and different things like that, that we do end up with a mixed community where people are supporting each other. It's like-minded people living together.
But there was an exception to that, because sometimes to make it viable, in example of some of the reading, they mentioned that you might have market value rentals for a couple of units or a percentage of the units to make the rest of the co-op sustainable.
Right.
Interesting. Okay, I know.
If you looked at this,
Okay, I was gonna say, I had one family member who has since passed, but she was part of she lived in a co-op in Vancouver. And it was quite unique because there was a lot of single elderly, but yet there were young families in there, and it was just a quaint little neighborhood, and they all looked after each other, and they all were invested in that structure. So it was,
My cousin lives
Good.
in Vancouver, or sorry, Victoria as well. And as his family has grown, like they've been able to move between units. So they haven't had to sell and like move,
Yeah.
potentially lose money. They were just, you know, as soon as a unit opened up with more bedrooms, they were able to move over. It was pretty
Terry?
sense in terms of aging in place.
Okay, right. Terry's, Ryan, any comments?
I didn't know much about models like that before this, and yeah, it's great. That kind of social enterprise where everybody is equal and can depend on their housing and stuff is pretty great. I'm keen to hear about the funding opportunities and stuff available for buildings like that.
Yeah, and the extra handout I gave you guys gives a little more background on land trusts as well. Right, community and BC workshops and that, but there's some really good background information in it that you might find. And a couple upcoming examples. It's a slightly different model in more recent times.
Terry, comment?
No, I just wondered where this would fit into the district of Sycamores.
There's a lot of places it could fit, actually. Yeah. We'll get more into that, like with our infill strategy. So got some infill in our low density neighborhoods. It all overlaps. Yeah, you'll see if you stay to the end. All right, so I did find a couple current examples of this is happening, and in this case, it's a combination, both cases, it's a combination of a land trust and the municipality. So this one's the city of Courtenay. They've been working on cooperative housing like at least 2010. Been doing this for a while, and they've got 3 project sites that they've applied for funding for. So they're working with the Community Land Trust, which I see it come up with a few different names, but it's this one organization that's in BC, and a number of different communities work with them to hold the land that these cooperative housing projects are being built on. So with the city of Courtenay, it's a partnership between the two. They're looking at a long-term lease agreement for city-owned land. We've got these 3 sites. They've applied for funding from the BC Housing Community Housing Fund Program. And depending on which of their 3 projects gets funding, those would be the ones they'd move forward with. They do more public consultation on like that form and like what the housing needs in terms of, I guess, in the community. So they're not like nailed down at this time, but they've got enough of a proposal to go forward with BC Housing. And these are proposed to include a mix of affordability levels, and they have the same struggle we do. It's low to middle income that needs housing in their community. So this would be for another example. This one seems to be further forward. This is the municipality of North Couch, and these are both on Vancouver Island, by the way. So they've got their own housing cooperative, the North Couch and Housing Cooperative, but they're also working with the Land Trust Foundation. So again, a long-term lease agreement. In this case, they've got 2 city-owned sites. The land trust in this scenario will finance, build, and operate the housing projects. So this is a diagram of the relationships. So the community land trust is sort of this central coordinating role. The municipality holds the land. They've got team doing all design. But they've got, so CMHC is providing funding, and then Van City is also providing financing. And then they've got a few different groups. So they've got 2 sites on Sherman Road, one of their sites, and they've got a combination. So they're looking at protected housing for women that need to get out of dangerous situations. So about 24 units, and they're also looking at 28 units that would be co-op housing. And then their other project, which is with an elder care co-op. So they're looking at, they've got a mix of different housing priorities here. they've got this other project that would also include community amenity space. And this image down here is the proposal for the project. It's fairly large, but they're townhouses, mixed townhouses. So a little bit on pocket neighborhoods. Very dear to some people's hearts. More people on Zoom today. They're also quite enamored. So pocket neighborhoods, it's an intentional design to create a communal neighborhood. This is an image of one that's in the city of Courtenay, actually, that I'm familiar with, called Creekside Commons. And it's actually a co-housing project. So the seniors and younger working people live there together. So pocket neighborhoods are typically grouped around, like it's a cluster of houses grouped around a communal amenity space. And that can be your access, which is typically styled more like a Woonerf. We're familiar with Woonerfs, which is mixed space. So vehicles can be there, but it's also a space where you would hang out. Kids would play. You might have your barbecue, hang out there. They're mixed. This is a very European idea that goes back to post-war Germany. I encourage you guys to look it up. It's interesting. So it kind of turns our normal suburban development on its head. It's also very communal. So it's sort of like a secluded neighborhood within a neighborhood. It's not a gated community. They're typically open because they're usually more socially conscious type-minded people. That still contributes to the streetscape. It's still part of the neighborhood, but it's sort of like its own little finger. The format for this, legal format, this could fit a number of different ways. So it could be a building strata. It could be a fee simple type strata with laneway access, which could be either actually dedicated laneway through subdivision. It could be an easement across everybody's properties that gives each other access. It could also make use of party wall agreements. So not necessarily, these buildings in this example actually do have multiple units in them, but it could be more like a row house type thing that goes off into a longer lot. I've got some images later.
Okay.
Yeah. It could, a housing co-op, this would make sense. A community land trust, this would make sense. So there's a variety of legal ways the land could be held. It could make use of manufactured housing units as well, because typically these kind of neighborhoods are smaller. You have smaller housing units, smaller yard space. That's why there's the shared amenity space. It could also include well-designed duplexes or threeplexes that feel more like a normal home, similar to the rest of the neighborhood, but there's higher density within them.
Okay. Malcolm?
Well, Sarah mentioned in the last comment there, higher density. So this doesn't seem to lend itself to higher density because, well, just by its design. Sycamoose has got limited property for housing. So and even BC Housing is looking at higher density. I like the model if there was, the land.
Yes, I will show you. It does make better use of land. So I'm sorry that this particular example kind of looks like more like a typical neighborhood. I agree the way the photo is shot. Yeah, I'll show you some. I've got some really good images that I'm excited to show you guys, and you'll see how it would work. Okay, so let's look at this rent to own study. This was a recent media item. It came up. This is happening in North Vancouver. I know a lot of examples are happening in bigger cities. They've got more need and more money to make these happen. And certainly, just as an aside, these are scalable for Sycamoose. So I wouldn't just completely ignore it. So in this case, this is a partnership specifically between the developer and the local credit union. This is a mixed use project. So this is the project here. But 168 homes, pretty big. 6 of them are through the AHOP program, which is a BC housing program for first-time homeowners, where I believe there's some grants that you can get for your down, that help you with your down payment. And there's other stipulations, but to help first-time home buyers get into their own home. That they, 8 of the units are through this rent-to-own model. It includes about 30,000 square feet of commercial space. You can kind of see it in the bottom there. There's 2 daycare units and communal space for the neighborhood, which would some of this area here end up on the roof. Pretty interesting. So in terms of how the mix of uses come together. So as far as the rent to own program goes, an individual's rent goes towards their down payment on actually purchasing.
And your rent is fair market value.
Yeah, you're paying fair market value, but you're not just throwing it away like you would normally be. It's going towards a down payment to be able to purchase.
Who finances that?
I believe it's the developer and between the developer and the credit union.
Sure.
Have to find out more details. And I know someone.
This example was over
Give us more info around.
over
that.
2 years, over 24 months.
Yes.
So I did include on here for you folks, a smaller scale example that would make more sense in a Sycamoose context, like say on Main Street. Or maybe. There's units above, and then there's some commercial space below with some nice streetscaping.
How much of a? Yeah, open questions or do you? How much of a footprint is that?
Well, that one's a lot smaller. I dug this one up while looking for stuff. Yeah,
Like a smaller one, is that a half acre? Like what's a,
I think that would fit on Main Street.
Yes, Tyson.
Is it the same percentage of homes that are rent to own in the smaller example, or are there more that are rent to own in that? Because it says out of 168 in the bigger one that there's only 8 that are rent to own.
Yeah, it's a bit, it's kind of lower in this case, right? Because this is a developer that's doing this. So that's what it can be a bit different where the partners are nonprofit societies, say like Habitat for Humanity, perhaps have a much better ratio.
Got you.
Part of the project is funded by individuals that are buying, like they're just built for the market. And so there'd be a mix in the building.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think is kind of some of the ideas being floated in town here. So,
That's right.
Oh, sorry, is this comparable to our own policy, allowing somebody to increase their density if they include
Yes.
low income space?
Yeah.
So this is like what you could build in Sycamoose if you're following our own existing bylaws trying to include your density.
Yeah, though I suspect that the density bonus requirement might be a little bit, it's like 10 units for every 1 or 10 for every 2. I'd have to look again. It's too bad Scott isn't sitting in here today. He wrote our amenity bonusing in the new bylaw.
And
He
he's-
knows it off the top of his head.
cities?
But yeah, so you can get an increase in density for every X number of affordable housing units. Which I think in our new bylaw, though, they're actually called attainable housing. We've got a different word.
But I think that's important because I think even with developers and everything else, when you put low income in there, that's not going to want me to come and live there. Right? I mean, I think wording is a huge,
We shouldn't talk about the buyers, we should talk about the housing.
Yeah.
Call people low income.
So anyways, it sounds like people kind of, did I hit it on the money? This looks like more the kind of side. Sycamoose.
How many units?
It looks like it could fit on a half acre lot or sort of an acre smaller. Yeah. Like I just think of the corner of Finlayson and Shoe Swap. I don't know who owns that, but
Paradise in Maine
yes,
could be a great spot. Anyway.
Yeah.
Moving on.
yes.
I digress.
No, that's it.
I digress.
How many units are in that one?
You know what? I didn't look. But that is a project. I do have the notes. It's,
So bottom floor looks a little bit commercial on the bottom.
and is there green space in the back? Families?
that one I don't know. I'd have to look into it. I mean, this is a project that has been built out down in the States somewhere.
Might be maybe 16 units with commercial in the bottom.
So it's feasible, it's a feasible build for our downtown. So we're gonna we'll align ourselves with
Yeah.
what the district's bylaws and stuff.
So in terms of understanding how that model would fit and work, right?
Mm.
Commercial space, there's can be rentals there. So there's income coming in to help support the building through that. Some of the units are for market. That also helps to fund the project and then supports any of the rental units or the attainable homeownership units. Could be a mix, right?
So is it just when we keep looking at going downtown and making everything walkable, which I agree with, do we have green space set aside so that we have benches for elderly or playgrounds set aside? Because if we're going to bring all these families into our downtown core and we're taking up what has been green space. I know we have where the bridge goes over, but is that something that the city, the town, DOS is looking into, that if we're going to bring a lot of families or elderly or anything like that, that we do have space that people can sit on a bench or take your kid outside? I think that's important, and I think it's something that, and I'm not saying that that's a housing issue per se. If we're taking up the whole lot to put housing, I know we need to have spaces. I think it's really important that we make sure that we have, if someone's coming out of an apartment building, they have somewhere their kid can ride a bike, or the old person can go out and feed a pigeon or whatever old people like to do. And maybe that's DOS and the housing committee working together, but I think that really that we need to make sure that we have some kind of, and I'm not saying that it's a giant park. I'm just saying that, if it's a patch the size of this room, there's a teeny playground or bench that we consider that when we go in, or that is built into when these units go in.
Yes, I'm just thinking along that line is, so maybe that's part of the setbacks that tie into multiple unit housing, is that we want to be cognizant of the fact that we're not just jamming in people, we're allowing them space to breathe and move and enjoy their home because it's part of their.
Well, we need our kids
Yeah,
outside.
Yeah, we do.
Moving, and
I
we've
agree.
got health issues and we've got all those kind of things going on. It's a huge part of Canada. And so I think we have to be forward thinking that we do allow space for that somewhere.
I think that's,
And I think it's good to raise public space for that, right? There's this balance when you need to increase density and affordability, you're going to start losing yard space, right? So you have to start thinking about different contexts. So in a more urban context, absolutely public on-street amenities, pocket parks, those types of things are going to be important as amenities for livability for those people. So we have the Live More strategy as well, which talks about that kind of thing, that should inform our housing strategy as well. And in a slightly different context, say like in neighborhoods, like in the tree streets where traffic is a lot slower, right? So kids can.
Different scenario.
Yeah, slightly different scenario. But the district is working on the Parks Master Plan and the Active Transportation Network. Watch for social media blasts and get involved in that as well. Yeah, and look for ways that the two can overlap for sure. Okay, so if we're good on the case.
Yeah.
Right. Moving into strategies. So because infill strategy, like a fairly strong thing that folks wanted to talk more about. And there's a lot of questions around, NIMBYism, that kind of thing, like how do you make it fit? There's a few images that I dug up. So here's a couple different streetscapes to kind of illustrate what infill looks like. So here's a couple examples of these homes, pretty similar to what we've got in Sicamous. And here's an example of what that would look like. So infill where they've subdivided an existing lot to increase the density that way. So in terms of how that's designed to fit in. And then here's an example. This is a threeplex. Doesn't look like a threeplex with a carriage suite at the back. So there's 4 dwelling units on a property that's definitely smaller than what we've got, say, in the tree streets. That's maybe about half the size, maybe a little less. So pretty interesting what you can fit, and like, it looks good when it's done. Here's another kind of example here. This is a spectrum of housing that we wouldn't necessarily see all the way in Sycamoose. This is an example from Kelowna. So they've got this more urban kind of thing going on. But these are examples of existing homes. Here's a couple examples of infill, like this one would have been subdivided. There are 2 separate dwelling units. This one is like maybe a 4-plex or a 3-plex. And then this is straight up row or townhousing. You can kind of see how they can be designed to fit in and not look totally out of place. Like obviously the building like this guy on the end would look out of place in our neighborhood. So this is also, here's an example of a good looking duplex. Duplexes, fourplexes, 3-plexes, they have a bedroom, right? They do not need to look like a big ugly box. They can look like that looks like a normal house. So a lot of these examples are out of more heritage kind of neighborhoods. So I know this might be a little slightly out of, but they can look good. And then one thing that I gave you guys is those are the design guidelines. I'm sorry, the development permit area guidelines from Bench for intensive residential housing to apply to infill. So that's a development permit area. And what that has in it are a lot of guidelines for how housing could be designed so that it fits into the neighborhood. And it addresses things like parking and
How many of these are any of them retrofitted like this, or are these all new builds?
examples. Some of them are new builds. But I mean, I've seen houses that are retrofitted that look like this in Victoria.
Yeah.
And they've taken a house, yeah. And certainly, like you'll see, like in those guidelines, it does talk about retrofitting as well.
Cool.
That's something close to my heart too. I'm like, when existing buildings, a little greener, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And support retrofitting in a way, it still looks like a single family home, but now there's X number of units there. I mean, of course, you still have to meet building code, which can be a little trickier.
Yes, Malcolm.
In Kelowna, in some of our previous material, they did a contest to builders, I guess, 4, 5, or 6 years ago or whatever. And for the easiest build, but still following one character in a neighborhood. And the winning model was a 4-plex, they called a quadplex, that you could stick in a residential neighborhood on a vacant lot, a standard 0.23 size of a lot. And it could be a 4-plex, and can't really even tell it's a 4-plex by looking at it. And so they get the design for construction design of that. It's available at the front desk at City Hall. A builder can bypasses the building permit because it's already approved design and for construction. And so they can be built quickly and used. So I think that's a tool that we need in Sycamoose. Like Invermere had that example of a 4-plex on a sloped property for 2 at the front and 2 at the back sort of thing. That might work in the west side of the channel. This 4-plex model, I guess what I'm saying is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We'll just plagiarize all the communities that have been doing some good stuff. I mean, they call it best practices, right? So, I mean, and you've done a good job of bringing examples to our committee. I think that's all we need to do in our toolbox is pick what's working everywhere and put it into our toolbox. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right.
It was the ones in Kelowna were so popular that they started being built everywhere. And then it started looking too conformed. Because it was such a success.
Probably have a few different sets of pre-approved plans.
Vancouver from the 70s.
Right. Same thing as that. Yeah.
Exactly.
That Vancouver special from the 70s.
Okay, so here's what I was talking about. These are what I was really excited to show you. So here's some lot layouts that illustrate different formats of infill, and I've got pocket neighborhoods on here too, next. So two are examples of subdividing existing. They take an existing property, split it down the middle, and in this case, how they're dealing with parking and access driveways, because that came up last meeting, is in this case, they have an easement for access between them, and their parking is at the back. So this is one way of addressing that. So there's going to be a little bit shorter setbacks. They're out for space on the front. So another example, this lot's a bit smaller. There's different lot sizes on here, but I can't read them. Here would be an example. So you would have it set back far enough that you've got parking space right in front, and then the space for two more here. This is the one in the garage. So this was probably like a 2.5 to 3-story kind of building.
Right.
Here's another subdivision. This one's a panhandle, which is a little more common where there's this existing property with an existing house and you don't want to rip it down. But there's enough room that you can fit a panhandle down the side, which would become their access into the back of the property. And Sycamoose does have some lots that are long like this, where the houses are in front and just full backyards. There's just nothing there, just trees or lawn. So that's an example of subdivision. This guy here is an example of neighborhoods. So there's a couple of different layouts here. You kind of show different formats of shared amenity space. So this one here would be more like the Wooner, where vehicles are passing through here, but this is also where everybody would gather together. Like the kids would play here, you have your barbecue here, that kind of thing would be going on. This one is an example where their shared space is here, and actually all their shared parking is to one side. So rather than individual garages or parking spaces, it's all outdoor. And these are smaller units. So I'm just looking at the lot size here. So this is under 1,500 square feet. This one is under 1,400 square feet. I want to compare it to one of these others.
I'm just gonna, and an acre is 44,000 square feet, is that correct? 44, 45?
I'm not good at.
Yeah, I don't have that in meters, but I did look that up myself.
Yeah.
And I think it's 44, it's in that range, 44 to 45,000. So then you've got,
It's certainly interesting. You start doing the math and there's more units there.
right, yeah. And if you were able to go up, but that's when parking maybe becomes a problem. In other words, do them all as duplexes or do 2 4-plexes. Which then doesn't really create the pocket neighborhood so much, but it's infill.
Yeah, but I mean, they could certainly
Yeah.
have smaller units, 9,
Yeah.
but units.
Yes, Ryan.
What, is there a gap between our R1 and R2, 1 and 2 family residential and multi-unit residential, where it'd be kind of hard to put developments like this?
We wouldn't do it in so we have one current intensive residential zone, right? That's Parksville. And you couldn't really do that. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's designed specifically for parcel sizes, right? Like in this format, like this could work for a housing co-op, this could work for a building strata. So your lot is the inside walls of your house. That's how a building strata works.
I was thinking of
This-
Malcolm talking about these 4-plexes
Yeah.
being so great, and indeed they are. How can we let developers go forth and build these? Because it's a bit of they'll be in here trying to get a rezone then and go through some hoops. Is there a way that we can say, well, if your lot is X amount of size, then you'll be permitted to build
Or
a 4-plex, maybe a specific one, or just needs to meet the setbacks essentially to be allowed then?
Yeah, so this is kind of how this came forward, right? Because we're talking about, is there some way we could increase density in low density areas, right? So we had talked a bit about bringing it to medium density, the whole thing in the OCP. And then, yeah, we could look at, and this would come after the new bylaws adopted, because there's all the consultation that has to happen ahead of it. So we can't do that quite yet. But yeah, we could look at crafting a zone. Maybe it's an attachment to the housing strategy. Here's an example zone that perhaps could be implemented, or here's an example development permit area or OCP amendment as like an addendum to it. But you could design a zone that allows for a density of 3 to 4 and perhaps allows for either format. It could be a single family dwelling with a secondary suite and a carriage house. So that's a density of 3. Or you could do a 3-plex, right? And then they're not accessory units there, right?
Well, if I could ask, just
Yes, go ahead.
our current zoning kind of like, it restricts the kind of house you can build based on your lot coverage and your setbacks and your parking requirements and stuff that everybody has in their zoning. Why wouldn't will you be allowed to build a 3 or a 4-plex in any zone, given that you could meet those criteria?
I'm just trying to understand what you're getting
Well,
at.
couldn't it be made that people could be allowed to build a 4-plex in a lot where it was suitable? So if somebody has, if you're going along, say, Cherry Avenue, which is the one that parallels Highway 97, there's a bunch of half-acre lots with houses on them that are right on the end. They border Cherry and one of the tree streets.
Mhm.
Now, one option would be to say pre-zone all of those multi-unit residential and say, you know, they're half-acre lots with a road on 2 sides. They got really good access. They'd be prime for that. But why wouldn't they just be allowed to build a 4-plex on a half-acre lot with good access?
Right, yeah, we'd have to design a zone for it that would allow for it.
But
Right.
could it just be allowed in an existing zone and have the requirements for all the things that I listed?
Oh,
Make it would have to conform
As a
or else it
general
wouldn't be allowed.
regulation.
They would be allowed if they would conform.
So instead of having a specific zone, you're talking about a general regulation that would say permissive in all zones.
Yeah, if we could,
List of zones.
yeah, you could specify, just let people have a 4-plex on a zone where it would be appropriate to have on a lot where it would be appropriate without really rezoning them.
If it fits, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So we can't put a 4-plex there. It's only 0.18 acres.
So on all lots, X square feet in size, square meters, sorry.
Like most of the lots in Sycamus are 0.23 of an acre. Most of the lots in the tree subdivision are 0.23. That's a sort of a standard size. So I think what Ryan what's the maximum you can put on 0.23 and have that pre-approved that they don't have to go through all the.
Mhm.
It may tie into our servicing. So that was one of the things in our barriers and constraints exercise where we were looking at, okay, well, where's servicing? So that would be like one of the requirements.
Would it be an option then just to make every lot over a certain size that you might consider zoning differently? I'm not quite sure which reduces the paperwork burden for us
Yeah.
developers the most.
Well, there's a few ways that it could be done. So yeah, you could certainly look at doing it as a general regulation and it might end up getting limited, like in some zones, maybe there's a complication there, or maybe there's certain. I think servicing is going to be the big one, because in some areas.
Yeah.
it isn't.
And there's already all the bylaws rather kind of existing for that, or do we have to make sure that we don't allow? people
I'm
to
talking
do
about
stuff?
existing water mains and sewer mains.
Like we-
in there.
If we zone things so that people can do them in an area and then we don't have services to provide enough services to those zones, then we would be the ones on the hook because we said they could build it, then we didn't have enough big enough water service.
I see what you're saying, but I think we're probably getting off a little bit off topic. We have our subdivision and development servicing bylaw, right? Which does require developers to do those upgrades and then we'll take them over.
I see.
But that doesn't help with affordable housing, like if that's the idea. Ideally,
Yeah.
it's in areas where we've already prioritized upsizing services. Or there's already existing servicing that could accommodate. So, and I think that's more what I was getting back at, like if we're Tree Street. Our team, right, our operations team, and find out, well, feasibly, how much could we increase density in this area? Based on what's already there, the size of our current water main, and that could be a question.
It sounds like a great question.
I think, yeah, I agree.
So if a
Yeah.
developer says, well, I got a half-acre lot on, say, a half-acre lot on an R2 zone, I'm knocking a house down. I want to build, and if he's interested in building something that's going to be more attainable, it'd be great to be able to say, yeah, you can build a fourplex there.
Right.
And you can just go through the motions. And if they want to build a building like that, that suits form and character, and it just looks like it looks great, then it would be a real shame to make it difficult for them to build that instead of a large house that's going to suit one family
Mhm.
and no cost to
Yeah.
us.
Okay, I can come up with some ideas for the draft strategy and we can review it and go from there.
I
Yeah,
like the questions you're asking, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks for indulging me.
No, absolutely. I only want to hear more so I understand kind of what you're trying to get at. Because there's a number of ways we could do it. Okay, so this was the next page of the infill. Here's what townhouses would kind of look like as far as site planning. This down to there is sort of a primo kind of layout would be on a corner lot with townhouses as far as limiting the number of accesses. So in this case, we've got frontage on 2 streets. You know, it's very sensitive to the streetscape, making it feel like a neighborhood, right? These are shorter front yard setbacks, so you're part of the street, part of the neighborhood. And then you've got one access off of one of the streets as far from the intersection as you say. And then that's where it leaves parking. This here was the other example for duplexes where they're side by side. Basically have the same, you know, design guidelines where your driveways need to be on opposite sides. So they're not far enough apart. There's enough room for sight lines, right? When you're backing in and out. So you're not running into conflict with the neighbor's driveway or partner's driveway. So there's a few ways to treat it. Like this can be built into zoning or through development permit area guidelines. This kind of considerations. So here's some different strategies around infill that help to address some of these kind of NIMBY barriers. So general strategies, infill should be designed to neighborhood, building height, massing, and roof forms need to be similar or setbacks, not really towering over existing houses. You may need to consider reduced floor areas to achieve an appropriate building mass, increasing density. So you may end up with smaller houses so that your mass, because you don't want these big normal size houses that are super close together now, that kind of impacts the form and character of the neighborhood. Consider established patterns of development. So what kind of spaces between existing buildings, setbacks, that kind of thing. Use building articulation, scaling, and setbacks to define individual units in a way that is oriented to pedestrians and has its connection to the street. So a lot of the building examples that I was showing you, they've been kind of designed in that way. And then when it comes to talking about parking and impacts on the streetscape, minimize the number and widths of driveways. So make them narrower, set in a bylaw, so a traffic bylaw. Maximum widths for driveways, as well as how many of them can be coming in and out of a property. So all the examples I've shown you where there's higher density, there's one access for the most part. They all share it. Vehicle access and parking should not dominate the site. So it shouldn't be, you know, all the parking's in the front and it's a house with just this no man's land in the front yard and it's full of vehicles. Shouldn't be that, right? Where people are backing in and out. The whole width of the front of the property is your driveway width. It shouldn't be that. In reducing front yard setbacks, be sensitive. It's a bonus because it can increase eyes on the street. The closer the house is to the street, the more sort of surveillance, natural surveillance there is on the street in terms of dealing with things like crime. People feel they're being watched, they tend to behave. And this can also allow for a transition from a suburban to a more urban residential pattern. So don't just bring your building right to the street front, say like in the tree streets. You might reduce it say you make it 3 meters in the tree streets instead of 6, because our road allowances are so wide that it'll look like 6. Making sense? Because a bunch of that grass in front of your house is not yours, part of the road. Single garages, they can be behind the front of the building, so they shouldn't be out front, they should be back or in the backyard. So that's a pattern that has been established through zoning up in the side zone, where garages have a 6 meter setback and the front of your house has a 3 meter setback. And then it's saying to you, like, if you're going to reduce front setbacks, have a 6 meter setback. So we're not the only ones who've done this, by the way. Right, so we're going to move on to talking about our strategies.
And for the strategies, and when we set this up, then it's the district, we propose the ideas or what we've got on paper, right? And it's the council and staff that create the actual all the details. You put it together and all that. We're just the concept, right? Is that correct?
Concept, yeah, so the strategy itself, we'll
Yeah.
hit the strategy.
Yeah.
I'll write it up based on what you guys have come up with, right? And then and you could include specifics if you wanted to, be like, oh, do this through zoning. But you wouldn't necessarily write that regulation.
Okay.
You wouldn't necessarily write, say, a development permit area and guidelines. So I did suggest you could, if you were that keen, we could put something in there as an addendum. It wouldn't be the strategy, but we don't need to go that far.
Okay.
A more open, which then be taken and implemented through a variety of other tools, like zoning bylaw, the official community plan, traffic bylaw for driveway widths, right? There's all these different places where it would need to be implemented.
Okay. So do we want to go through these other strategies then and add them? Do you want to lead us through that now at this point?
Sure.
And-
So this first slide is the strategies that has already come up with. These other strategies, so there's a few items that came up from our last few sessions from some of the case studies. Pre-approval of building plans, because it accelerates the permitting process. I think we've already got something pretty similar to that. Building apartments using a modular design. There was an example in LA where they would buy the units pre-plumbed, pre-wired, and they essentially just clicked them together like Lego. So something that's pre-manufactured that's meant to go together, like a modular apartment building, perhaps. Rebates to encourage development. So we did at last meeting have an idea around, say, a grant program as opposed to a rebate program. Creating short-term employee housing with shared amenities, what Councillor Malcolm was talking about earlier today. A gentle rezonings can increase density without changing character. So this is something that did come up in some of our earlier sessions. Well, what if we just rezone the tree streets and we just allow more density, right? And so empty lots or lots where there's a desire or they're not in poor condition and they come up available development potential. So it's not something that you would see the whole neighborhood character change overnight. It would be in spot places where there's opportunities. But what the idea behind that is that if everything is zoned for it, it helps to keep the land value down because it's not the only site in town that allows for multifamily dwelling, right? Now there's lots of sites in town that allow for it, and then that reduces the land costs that makes the land more accessible for developers who want to do it. And then therefore the cost benefits can be passed down to the future homeowner. You don't have to spend as much on the land. So from our exercise looking at barriers and opportunities, we know there's only like maybe 2 or 3 sites that are currently zone multifamily that are vacant in town. And nothing's happening.
So I have a question. So if I own, and I'm just going to say I own a lot in the tree streets and I'm a resident here. and we implement this, but I don't have a good understanding of what's going on. Can we have information, or is that part of our strategy, is to create that knowledge base too for the residents, so they can go and say, well, you know what, I'm thinking about moving, or I'm thinking about this because I need to downsize, but or I'm financially strapped and I need to know that what kind of opportunities, but they're the lay guy and they don't understand the language or what we're talking about. Is that a tool that the district can provide to the residents as a, here's an information package, this is what we're doing. This is what we want to do, because we want you to be informed, because it may not be, they're a stakeholder just as is a developer walking in, or somebody who's just moving into town and buying land and wanting to do something. If we're trying to increase density, I think there definitely needs to be an education piece on how that could possibly work for them. So they're not, knowledge is power.
How would you phrase that as a strategy that we would write into our?
Well, maybe it's not a strategy. I guess I'm just saying,
Strategy.
is it a strategy? Okay, all right. So I feel that it's,
Well, it's already in our schedule for public engagement.
yes,
But she's talking about,
this is deeper.
this is more like as a strategy to support,
Right.
the support infill development within Sycamoose. The strategy recommends that the district of Sycamoose prepare pamphlets and guides that are available on the website.
Yes.
And we had that conversation, I think, in our first meeting, that when someone does come, that was something we talked about, is having a strategy of, you walk in and you're like, hey, I'm new to Sigma's, what can I do? And we're like, here's what you can do and here's how we're going to help you out, right?
And we'd have some kind of, phrase. It's like,
Yeah, right.
recommending to the district, like who's the partner who can do it, the district, who's another partner, the development corporation, right? They can disseminate some of that information through. So if these pamphlets are created, it's something that could be handed out.
Or maybe it goes out with the tax roll, like the newsletter. I'm just, so every homeowner in the community understands and knows what we've written, what the strategy is, what it involves, what they can do if they're thinking, where do they go, what do they ask? But some of the more pertinent information, so they can go, oh, you know what, I think that sounds interesting. And I'm going to do that, or I'm going to look into it, right? So that does actually fit in with our vision statement, basically. Yeah.
Do we have any history on, do we have developers coming to Sigma's going, hey, I want to do this, and then they're hitting roadblocks? Or most people that are coming to build now are just coming to build a single family home? And then what is the strategy to then? So maybe we have people and we have too many roadblocks, and do we have any history that we can look on to where we pull the roadblocks for them? Or how do we encourage people to come and build units instead of, so you're going to get more bang for your buck, but is there any kind of
Currently has or was working on, it may already be done, a map, here's a bunch of sites that are vacant and developable, and here's the kinds of things that our official community plan supports, right? So, and I believe that part of what council is trying to achieve with our new zoning bylaw was to implement the official community plan so that folks didn't have to go through zoning amendments, because they take several months and they have to be approved by the Ministry of Transportation and all this kind of stuff. So trying to put in place a zoning bylaw that removes some of that red tape. And then the other component is a review of our development approval processes to try to streamline that, which is something that the development services manager is working on, that kind of goes in tandem with the new zoning bylaw. There's a bunch of moving parts here. Also update of our subdivision servicing and development approval bylaw, which has requirements in there about off-site works that need to be done. So some changes to our standards to reduce them. So our older version from like prior days, when there was a push for it to be more of a resort community with like high level of amenities, dialing it back. Like, so if someone goes to do a subdivision, the tree streets, and build there, we're not going to be asking them to put in sidewalk. That is our standard.
But do we have any history to know that if we have, like, are we starting from scratch trying to encourage developers to come here? Or do we have 10 or 20 people that are already going, hey, this is really a great place that, you know, Prince George had this, where they had, and they had people building townhouses to accommodate workers and pricing went through the roof and they 15 years go. And developers went in there and they had money to spend and they're like, hey, this is where we want to spend their money. And Prince George had to come up with, how are we going to accommodate these people? So one, we have our housing, and two, we're taking developers' money and they're doing that. So do we know that we have developers coming ready, looking at Sycamoose and we're just not ready for them? Or are we going to have to attract people to come in?
We're not going to need to attract anyone.
Do you think that we're going to have people that want to come in and build these and drop their money?
There's already interest.
Okay,
Yeah, and the biggest issues are servicing and our subdivision standards bylaw, right?
servicing, you meaning water and hydro?
Water mains.
Water mains, okay.
Yeah, I mean,
So we already have a captive. We've got buyers.
we're already attracting folks, yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
There's lots going on.
Welcome.
But from a developer standpoint, you need to make a profit and cheapest, the least expensive way to make a profit is RV lots. And we've had some RV lots, we've had some zoned housing on Hillier Road downsized or downzoned to RV lots.
Where's that?
On Hillier Road, just before the tracks out towards Old Town, you turn
Okay,
right.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So-
fun now.
Right, because there's a demand for mobile homes and there's a market there. But developers follow the market. They don't, and the need doesn't always match the market. We need,
Or developers' priorities, which is why we have a
Right.
strategy to try to support rental housing, and that's what we're trying
like in
to.
the regional district in the golf course, they downzoned some residential to allow for recreational lots. That's something that I typically never support as a counselor, but that's developers are driven by profit and rightly so. And we encourage them to come in and make profit in our town. But we set the stage in how they go about doing that. And I think the money right now is as a resort town for RV lots as opposed to affordable housing. Affordable housing is mainly driven by nonprofits or local municipalities in concert with BC Housing. So there's different drivers trying to achieve different things. I had a quick question. We're getting close to our time here. So on other strategies, did we capture the MRDT tax anywhere?
You know what, we have talked about it before, and I felt like I was missing something. So, yeah, so MRDT, the way the district is currently set up, and that's a 5-year program.
Can you
So,
explain that? Sorry.
so what it is, it's a provincial sales tax.
So the acronym, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Municipal,
Resort or recreation development tax or something like that. I'd have to look it up.
Destination tax.
It's a British Columbia provincial sales tax that's taken from individuals staying in hotel units, short-term rentals, right? It's a tax on their thing. And so what the district currently has is a 2% tax that's currently being collected. It applies to short-term rentals as well since 2018. And so that money is specifically for funding tourism, specifically. Now you can redo your agreement. And the recommendation is to wait until our current 5-year term is up and then come back and see if we can get agreement. Because all the hoteliers and short-term rental owners, operators, it's half, but it's based on number of rooms. So your representation of 50% of the rooms have to vote for it to change it, right? So we can take an extra 1% that would be specifically for affordable housing. So 2% goes to tourism. 1% could go into, say, an affordable housing fund or whatever. We'd have to look at the rules to see. I think it actually has to go to a specific project. So it'd have to be directed to one that's specifically happening. So if the district has one that's going on, say we end up with an actual project with Habitat for Humanity, it's moving forward, that could be our project that money would go to. And that'd be for a period of 5 years. And then the next time you renew, you'd have to come up with another project in order to take that, continue taking that 1%.
Could question. So would it be, what about, so the DOSDC is a corporation.
Mhm.
And if it also had, that fell under it, it was run by, it was the housing,
Yeah, they could.
or the housing, whatever, it would have its own, so it's a corporation and it can do some different things, but that would be, then that funding could go to one organization, i.e.
It can't go to an organization. It's project specific.
project specific, okay,
Chunk of land, specific building.
okay,
Yeah, like we can't say, oh, let's take this and start and buy some
Yeah.
plans. What if we could use it to do our library of pre-approved plans? No, it doesn't work that way.
okay, all right, Malcolm?
Our committee here is not quite lined up with what council's doing as far as. I guess our election's in November when I come to think of it. So our timelines for October should,
A lot of it's internal, right? Like until that stuff is official, like it's not really stuff that we can bank on, right?
right,
So we know stuff's happening.
but
But
my question here is. This committee is not quite lined up with some of the things councils is currently doing, specifically new zoning bylaw 1000.
we did bring it to last meeting at
Yeah, so
various request and talked about it then.
that's at second reading now, I think, zoning bylaw 1000. So which goes to
That's our Airbnb,
yeah,
Short-term
Airbnb
rental,
is
yeah,
captured
yeah,
in
yeah.
that zone, in that,
just so I know what we're talking.
that's captured in the zoning bylaw 1000. Is there any low hanging fruit that our committee can grab and bypass our schedule that you've shown there to, taking us into September, October and make some early, I know there's supposed to be some public consultation process involved in here. And we get in trouble a lot for not involving the public, and I'm not suggesting we bypass the public, but is there any low hanging fruit that council is currently not capturing that our committee seems to all have consensus around, that we can make an early recommendation to try to get captured in the zoning bylaw 1000, as opposed to trying to make amendments to that zoning bylaw in October, November, December sort of thing? Because it's easier to put it into the bylaw as it's being adopted as opposed to amending the bylaw.
Yeah,
My question is there any low hanging fruit as a committee, a housing committee, we can make some early recommendations to council to try to get captured in that bylaw?
not that the committee has specifically looked at, right? Most of the things the committee, most of the ideas, the strategies are ones that we need to update the OCP. So, and that's a big consultation process that would hold up that zoning bylaw. Like there are a number of low hanging fruit that was added to it through the rewriting of the bylaw. And we talked about a lot of that at the last meeting. So, I mean, potentially there's room to tweak some things like the amenity bonusing, right? Like how many units have to be provided in order to get that extra density, right? Or to add in that whole parkland dedication thing. So instead of taking cash in lieu of or land for parkland, we could take cash in lieu of. I can't remember quite how it works, but you can take it for housing instead. So instead of taking parkland, you can take for housing. So like that's some kind of low hanging fruit that could be tweaked. Another component could be, all our residential zones, they allow one accessory dwelling unit, right? And that's been tweaked to allow it to be detached. You don't have to go through zoning amendment anymore to have it detached. You could potentially bump up that density say, oh, every single family housing dwelling unit could now have 2 accessory dwelling units. One has to be inside the house and one can be a separate building, like a garden suite or carriage house, so that it still looks like, right? So there's a few things, but most of the ideas are pretty big.
Just, it was just a question, just throwing it out there.
I have,
I know Scott said it's too late, like, there's not really enough time.
Okay.
I got one related to that, which is, I'm looking for the map, the OCP map.
Oh.
The area between Shuswap and Riverside, all multi-unit residential in the OCP.
It is, but there's no lots left. So that's like one of our big flaws with our OCP right now is that we have a land use designation on lands that are brand new, single family, like the opportunity to create more multifamily doesn't exist.
But because it's already zoned multi-unit, couldn't we increase the zoning?
I see what you're saying.
On
Oh,
existing stuff.
so proposal. Another zone that has this higher density, these 2 units, or say increase it, so say they can have 3 plexes. Just in that part of town.
Potentially. There's something that feels to me about. There's probably a good practical reason why there's a lot of zones, but if we could have one zone that captured more stuff, but have flexibility within it to allow stuff where it met the criteria. Perhaps it'd be easy to be able to leave it all be one zone, but lots over a certain square footage would be allowed an additional units. It could happen in multiple steps.
Were you talking about 4 plexes, 3 plexes, 4 plexes? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, not
That
necessarily.
are
The
sensitive,
ceiling
that
might
it's an
be,
infill, like an infill zone.
yeah, it could be infill or larger multi-unit structures that would be permitted. And there wouldn't necessarily be a maximum allowed in the zone. The maximum would be according to the ability of your property to accommodate those buildings. Assuming, of course, like you said about servicing and such.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if that half-acre lot here, if it bore out on paper, perhaps we determine that a half-acre lot would be really suitable for a 4 or 6 plex at its highest use, and you'd build one family through the maximum.
Most of it's already developed with single family. So we'd probably be looking at like a zone that's tailored more to infill. So unit conversion, existing home, converting it into 3 units, and maybe something in the backyard. But it's still a good idea to have density targets. Which is something that the medium density, the OCP should do, but I don't think our medium density residential zone has a density target in it. But yes, that's more kind of low hanging fruit. You're right.
So I heard no.
Put a little star here. That is a great idea.
Yeah.
I know,
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I know I'm a little bit late to the party, so I'm sure you guys have already gone over this, but when you look at Sycamoose from, the hang gliding ramp and you sort of see how hemmed in we are by ALR in space, does the district have a greater lobbying power to try to retrieve some of those areas out of the ALR? Because when you think about densification, it's like, well, we have space and there's lots of ALR space that's not even used for agriculture, and yet we're pinned in.
Yeah, so yes, there's definitely something that's been identified. So our growth strategy identified that. What was that one? 2012 or something, just before we did our newer OCP, 2016. So the ALC is supportive of removing land for housing. However, so some developers have gone through that process. And so the ALC has, made some decisions and made some statements. Like, I don't think we're going to get a lot more out of there until we've actually densified. We do actually have a lot of vacant land currently it's not in ALR, right? Like, we've got a lot of room to grow still.
Where is it? Because it's on one area, in one aspect we're hearing like, oh, we're running out of spaces and lots to do.
It's that map right there.
There's a difference between brownfield development, which is new lots,
Mm.
brownfield development. And what I'm talking about is infill brownfield development. We have a lot of space between buildings. We've got a lot of vacant land.
Mm.
We can increase density. We can go up. So, and that's how like all the, higher provincial governments are looking at things, and that's how planners are trained and educated. Those are best practices. You increase your density on the land you have.
Well, now before more of it is made available.
Yeah, so once we've got a bunch of our existing development sites built out, once, there's been some infill, like successful infill, then we could potentially see some more land come out for that purpose. But we're talking about, changing the way our town looks a little bit.
Okay,
Smaller lots, potentially smaller houses, and higher buildings in our downtown area, right? So probably more mixed use.
so again, sorry, since I'm just coming late. Are all of these green lots privately owned?
The yellow ones,
No, yeah, sorry, yeah, the yellow.
I apologize if you're colorblind. Yeah, most of them. Some of them are owned by the district. Some of it is actually owned by MOTI, but most of it is privately owned. So, and I think that's part of what Siobhan and Brenda have been talking about, where once we have this strategy and we've identified places on the map, now people will know, like, I'm looking to move, like, what can I do with my property? What's it worth? And you look at this, it's like, oh, I'm identified on here, or, oh,
Right,
I have this zoning. There's actually more density that could be done here.
can we reach out to individual owners? Is that
That-
going to happen when we come up with this?
Well, I know in terms of projects that are driven by the district has been proactive and has reached out to private property owners and has purchased land. So that's where those lots on Main Street
Okay,
from, right? But in general, outside of that, they become kind of opportunity sites. Like you wouldn't necessarily be going to people and saying, hey, you have to sell because this has to be this. Like you can't.
no, but informing them that that's the,
I think that's the idea with that pamphlet.
That's what I felt was that we need to let the community know.
right.
We need to let the residents know what this is and have their input on it, but at least
It's part of our concept.
and it's part of the consultation, but once that's done, because there's lots of people that won't come.
Yeah,
So having a brochure that's available,
Having a
front counter.
Exactly.
It's available like at the DOS-DC, like Carly has all kinds of information about developable land, and like she's the one who entertains developers coming to town and looking like, right, and promoting these kinds of things. So she would have that information. And we could have it on our website. We can do a news release saying, hey, did you know? We've just adopted this strategy.
Well, and I think the other big thing that the DOS has to do, and maybe that is part of us too, is also educating people on thinking of what a home looks like. Because I think a lot of residents, local residents, want a 3-bedroom yard fenced for $385,000. Which doesn't exist anymore. And it's re-educating about what our town is, so we can change what the town's gonna look like, and we can say, oh, okay, we're gonna do duplexes and stuff like that. But what you're gonna get for it, get the buy-in, so that maybe you can now afford a house, but you are gonna have green space, but it's not going to be a wraparound porch or whatever that is. And I think that's a really big thing, because we can tell everybody that they're getting peaches for breakfast, and if I want cereal, I'm gonna be mad. Ryan wants to sell peaches. But I think that's another huge thing that this committee or the district has to do is I think a lot of long-term residents, but I also think a lot of people that are coming in and buying in Sycamoose now are buying because they're getting space and property, and they want to build a big house, and they want the kid to have a swing set. So how do we change that we still have some kind of, you're gonna hear green space for me for the next year, if you let me stay here. That we have some kind of green space and that it's still community-based, and we can still have a quality of life that you think, but it's just gonna be a little bit different. And that makes it affordable for everybody. And I think that's something we really have to look in is getting our consultation, but also getting the buy-in. That we convince, that it isn't, people aren't slamming, because if you're taking someone that has grown up in a 3-bedroom house in Sycamoose and walks the tree streets, and you say, now you're going into this little square apartment building, and that's now your new affordable housing, and that's what we gave you. You're gonna, think about how if someone painted the train white, holy cow. How that happened. The train nobody has ever stood on in 25 years that 6 tourists stopped to take a picture of. And somebody turned it white, and now it is, we might as well lit someone on fire and ran them up and down Main Street. So I think we really have to be careful that before we come up with any ideas that we get our buy-in. I think it's,
I think that's where it's important that like we've got ideas that fit all groups, right? So that's part of what I'm hoping we can do. And maybe we need to have another strategy session. Is looking at our groups and which kind of formats are going to fit and work for them, right? Because this guy isn't for everybody, right? But these guys are a lot more like, that's a lot closer to what your expectation is of buying your first home, right? So maybe you can't afford this anymore, but you can afford this.
Yeah.
Right? And you've still got a backyard, you've still got a front yard, and you're still in the neighborhood you grew up in. Right?
exactly.
Yeah, and it still looks and feels
Like, and in Vancouver with those, what they do is that they're 3 floors, right? Like actually, that was one of my first homes. I lived in the middle one. Yeah, in Vancouver. So
there's a unit on each
Yeah.
floor.
exactly.
Yeah.
But you have a bit of, but I think we really have to it's not so much convince people, we actually have to let people convince themselves that here's where our opportunities are. And it is having those pop-ups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people still think that Sycamoose is just gonna buy property and plunk a house down and say, okay, your rent's $1,200. And the town's gonna cover that for you. I think a lot of people are still, or that housing somehow is gonna go from $650,000 for a 3-bedroom house back down to $385,000. There's a lot of people that think that is what we are doing here. And it's just not, it can't be done, right? Like
It's the education piece for sure.
100%.
Yeah, we just need to be totally open and give them as much information as possible. But Tyson is exactly what we're just talking about. He's the guy who grew up here. He moved away and went to school, married, back in town.
What's the,
What's the comment on what's your expectation moving back in town? Have you purchased something? Would you like to purchase something?
we'd love to purchase something
Yeah.
on the streets, but at
Yeah.
this point, it's out of reach.
So
550 for a tear down, 700 for a tear down, or or just your BC box. So I feel like, but I could have done something different and along the way and maybe been in the position. But I think lots of people are wondering, how will the tree streets, for the people who are moving back, is it always going to be like this? I think there is a waiting around to see if prices come down. But I feel like, people who are raising families here, they want that opportunity to be a part of the community. And one of those things is either being able to buy or rent. And that kind of brings me to my point, is that, attracting developers isn't always mean securing, long-term rental or secure housing for people, because what we've seen here in Sycamoose is the places that were affordable housing, affordable rent for many years. People came from out of town and bought these places and kicked people out and made rent, triple what it was. And so I don't know what strategies this committee can come up with to make sure that that doesn't happen to people, because it's rampant at this point.
So would you welcome the opportunity though to do like would you move into a fourplex? Would a duplex, would buying a lot in the tree streets, doing the tear down
or co-op.
doing co-op co-op housing.
housing be attractive to you?
Well,
Yeah.
you.
Because it could be like a pocket.
On that you grow up a certain way and then you get used to, or you sort of conform
You want
your
your
ideas
family,
around.
what you want your family to do.
Yeah, that's right. And it's hard not to want what's in the tree streets. You see, you know, these beautiful houses on a lot and you think like, wow. So I think, but you know, developments like Parksville, it's hard to wrap your head around, you know, wanting that because you don't have a yard, you don't have all the things that you grew up with. So, it's re-education and maybe starting to adjust but our generations has had to adjust its expectations dramatically because we don't have the same opportunities our parents did.
No, it's a change, it's a sign of the times, right? It's what the economy is now.
It's coming up our middle ground, like I say, that either when we're talking to developers that we're not filling the property with just building, that there is green space, or that when we talk about developing these communities and we're letting developers come in, that they, you know, I remember the sidewalk push. So maybe it's not the sidewalk push, that there is a communal park, and that's, you know, I spent 20 odd years down on the coast and went from apartments to townhouses to a house, because that's what you could afford down there. But where the green space, where there's a little park and a slide and a thing, that actually becomes your community. And that your family then, you know, you, at the end of the night, you go down there and all your kids run around and you're, oh, Martha, well, you know, you've got your sippy cup of wine or so-and-so's grandma's there. So you can run back to the house to flip your laundry because that older lady knows all the kids and you know, she's not crazy or too crazy. But you form sense of community in there. And for me, and I'm just speaking for myself, I think that's really important, that if we're pulling people away from the idea of the tree streets and what we grew up in, that we say, okay, but we also offer this sense of community, and people are going to struggle and they're not going to like it. But when they get there, it's not going to be as hard as you think. And there's benefits. So there's other benefits to it, that it's, you know, you're losing something, but you're also getting something. And I think we have to be really cognizant that we don't create something that nobody wants.
Right. Well, I think we have to also remember that's one demographic, those that have grown up here with that expectation, that have come back and want to treat. Then there's lots of people that are moving here, new families. I see them all the time walking the streets. I don't know what they do or where they work, but I've seen so many young couples with youngsters, and I feel like there's a lot of them. So maybe they don't have that expectation. So that's another chunk of demographic.
And they're coming out of Kelowna or Vancouver, and they're coming out of a townhouse, and they're happy to go back into that. And I mean, honestly, that's what reality is. That's what affordable housing is. Affordable housing isn't going into a house. And affordable housing also helps people downgrade. So if you can't look after your property anymore, that you've got a smaller space that you can still stay in your own home and have community. And it also is a starting point for a lot of people, that they can get into that and then they can jump, you know, that gets them set up, and then they can take the next step into, if that's what they want. So I think it's a really good medium.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I think
Fine.
that's great what Siobhan said. I mean,
Yeah.
you can sit here with good intentions, but people have to have, our community has to have realistic expectations of what we're doing here. We come up with a great idea and then, no, that's not a home, that's, you know,
was
like
the thing.
Westview across the street.
Today's home.
Coming up with one idea.
Yeah.
We're coming up with multiple ideas that are meant to address multiple gaps, multiple income groups. So, and what the strategies you have so far, they're broad. You've got all of them.
Yeah.
Like
You need to hit the
idea will support all these housing types, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the continuum needs to be met so that everybody can fit into today's market, at today's rates. And there's a variety of options. So as long as we've got development happening or people wanting to go ahead and subdivide their lot, panhandle it, do carriage houses, it'll accomplish more units, whether it satisfies everybody's taste. They're just gonna have to figure out, you know, I guess what fits them. Yes, Brian?
Well, because I'm the guy who's like, well, let's just let everybody build as many lots as they can reasonably
Yeah.
fit on their property. And what Siobhan is saying about park, I think I feel that you should say that, you know, in the normal procedure, if somebody has a big one family lot and they want to turn it into multifamily residential, they go through a rezoning process that is both, it's a barrier in some ways to redevelopment. It takes time, and you know, you do buy the property or not before you go ahead with it. But then as part of that, the city can demand a park allowance or put some money aside for park. And in what I'm kind of suggesting, not purposely, that would be gone, because I'd say we should just say, you can build this here because it'll fit it. And then we don't get that park allowance, which is bad, but we also don't add that added cost onto the development. So it's kind of, it's give and take.
Sorry, I'm just writing basic
Yeah.
thing. I'm turning that into a strategy statement for you.
Oh, thank you.
Note, yes. This is what I'm saying. I'll bring it all back. Listening, I'll bring it back. We can tweak it. Yes, rewrite it, remove the
Yes.
sleep. Okay.
I think that's good. Yes, Tyson.
I just want to quickly, we didn't exactly address how are we protecting renters from, because like we said, the developers can have a variety of interests and stuff like that. So how are we protecting people who are renting from that, you know, being evicted, you know, without cause? And then I think, because that's a major issue that's going on in Sycamus right now.
Who wants to talk about?
I don't know, is that,
Went over last meeting.
I think that's outside of.
yeah, yeah, it
Okay.
doesn't fall under us.
It's not. Okay, here we go. All right.
Okay.
Come back.
But yeah.
I got you. Okay. There's a bunch of tools we can use, right? So, I mean, without, like, right now, we can make all the statements we want about, okay, the district needs to find a partner that's gonna hold units, right?
Right.
We need to find someone who's gonna manage these, a nonprofit organization that's willing to manage those kind of rental units.
Got you.
The other tool that we have, that's built into our new zoning bylaw is that, and so that it's a carrot, it's voluntary, where a developer wants to build a multifamily, they can have extra units if they provide X number of attainable units. And an attainable unit is defined as, I'm not gonna have the perfect definition. They have to enter into a housing agreement, which is registered on title, and it's through bylaw, right? So that then becomes an attainable housing unit. And how that unit is dispensed of,
Yeah.
to the committee. So our current housing strategy says any lot, so for example, Parksville,
Yeah.
there are a number of lots there, and I think there's maybe only 3 at this current phase, that in order for anyone to buy it, not just anyone can buy it, they have to make an application to the housing committee and they have to meet the criteria that's in the current housing strategy.
Okay, like,
In order for them, and so the housing committee would identify which people are interested in buying that lot, actually meet the criteria, and make a recommendation to council, and then council would decide who can actually buy that lot. So the developer can't just sell it to anyone.
right.
Yeah. if we-
Covenant on title, the title can't be transferred legally without this whole process.
Just what Sarah said, back that up a bit. So about 10 or 12 years ago, that property was in the agricultural land reserve. And a developer was able to get it out under condition that a certain percentage of that land is used for affordable housing.
Right.
And that's protected with a covenant. It's called a 219 covenant. And even if the property changes hands, a covenant stays with the property. So it's protected that way on the new stuff, but on an existing house in a tree subdivision, there's no.
Could be. As far as rentals, we don't.
So as a strategy, something that's come up is folks that want to leave a legacy. This is one of Brenda's ideas. They would have the option. So we would write a strategy that says, oh,
Listening, it's all awesome.
the conversation.
The
room is booked, yeah.
Okay,
Okay, sorry, guys.
okay,
Wonderful.
5-7 minutes.
okay, give us 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, we're out then.
You just come to kick us out, eh?
Yeah,
Fine.
I've been listening. I got some things in the chat.
I'm so sweet in chat.
I think. Direction,
Oh.
really good
Yeah,
direction.
yeah, I think we're going somewhere. And like, we can talk after the meeting, like until it's time for me to go home.
Hmm.
And I can catch you up a little bit on some of our previous sessions, because you're asking stuff, like you're late to the game, like you say. We've been there,
Yeah.
so, and I feel like these folks need some reminders too.
Yes.
Can you finish your trend of thought that you were just talking?
Remind me what I was saying.
No.
Houses on Tree Street, how are they protected?
Right.
Oh, right, yes, this.
So there's a couple other tools that can be implemented. So I think Campbell River is looking at implementing this one. This is again on the island. My apologies. All my planner friends are from the island. This is how I find out about these things in my circles. And entering into, it's an agreement that would go untitled. It's like a first right of refusal on properties. So we could write language like a recommendation that the district adopt a policy through its OCP, for example, of, someone who wants to donate their property for housing when they die. Well, we could put this agreement on title so that the district or a housing, like if we have a housing association locally that wants to manage these, they have the first right of refusal to purchase. So when somebody goes, so there would be a process to identify who would be eligible to buy the house. But then when they wanted to sell it, there would be a process for selling it. So the district or the housing society could buy it back, and there'd be agreement about price to keep that resale down. So it'd probably be similar to the housing, the land trust and the co-op kind of tool.
Yep.
Where there's a percentage, like, so you can earn some equity to support further home ownership of that individual. But the price couldn't go over a certain amount, and there'd be a certain amount that would have to go back to the housing society or to the district into the housing fund to fund other things, for example. So that's another tool. Is this agreement first right to purchase or first right of refusal, so that lands can be taken into the hands of an organization that will ensure that the resale value remains attainable. Another way is local governments can now zone specifically for rentals. So we don't currently have that implemented because it's a little tricky to just tell someone your zoning now is you can only rent, like you can't live in your property kind of thing. Now, if there was sort of a blanket zone put on to a property like that, that use would become non-conforming. So somebody currently lived in their house, they owned it and they lived in it, it wouldn't boot them out.
Yeah.
Automatically. But over time, the idea would be that it becomes rental.
Development. That's like, okay, you can develop this, but it's gonna be this zoning.
Yeah. So that's another tool. There's a bunch of other ways, but yeah, I'm cognizant that
Okay.
we're running over.
Yeah. So where are we? On the agenda, so our next meeting is
July.
July.
Mhm.
Okay.
The first
We're
Thursday.
not adding another 2 weeks. Do we need it? Do we need one more? I feel like please. I think we're on a roll. These are killing you.
Yeah,
Killing Sarah. Please not what?
please no.
Please no. We have to have all this stuff together.
Yeah, we're getting into our busy season and I do have lots of other responsibilities.
Okay.
Trying to get some housing permits done.
Yeah, exactly. So the next meeting would be on the 7th of July.
Okay. So I guess then I will. If there isn't any further discussion, we're all good. I'll recommend that the Housing Committee meeting for June 2nd, 2022 be adjourned at the time being 2:52.
Second, third, fourth.
First, second, Ryan,
Hello.
Siobhan. Okay. Adjourned.
Thank you very much for your time, Sarah.
That was great.
Thank you, Sarah. That was absolutely
Thanks a lot.
awesome job. Yes,
I have,
yeah.
I'm impressed even with myself that I pulled that off. I started this on Monday.
Oh,
Spring, right?
What was it?
nice.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I know of it, for sure, like, you know, buddy, and